Subscribe to our YouTube channel and press the bell icon to get the latest updates. Hello everybody, welcome to Daily News Simplified, an answer to what, why and how of newspaper reading. Today we shall be analyzing the Hindu newspaper dated 4th of August 2021 of the New Delhi edition. The topics to be discussed today have been presented on the screen. Timestamping for the same has been provided in the description box below. Let us begin our today's discussion. The first article in today's analysis appears on page number 6 in the form of a lead article. The article is titled as Poverty in India is on the rise again. This article shall be important from the perspective of GS Paper 3 Indian economy. See, in order to estimate as to what percent of India's population is living below the poverty line, we carry out a survey known as the Monthly Per Capita Consumption Expenditure Survey. Based upon the results of this particular survey, the Niti Aayog then estimates the proportion of BPL population in India. Last time, this particular survey was carried out in the year 2017-18, but the report was not made public. So right now, whatever estimates we have with respect to BPL population, it is as of the year 2011-12. We do not have the estimates of the BPL population for the year 2017-18. See, recently, the National Statistical Office has published a periodic labor force survey report. This report, as you know, basically captures the employment and unemployment rated data. This particular report also captures the consumption expenditure of the households. Now, based upon this particular data, which has been published in the periodic labor force survey report, the authors of this particular article here have tried to capture the percentage of BPL population as on year 2019-20. Now, according to the authors of this particular article here, they do believe that according to the latest PLFS report, the percentage of the BPL population has now increased to 25.9%. So, in the year 2011-12, the percentage of BPL population was 21.9, and now, according to the authors, it has increased to 25.9%. Obviously, whatever data which have been put forward by the authors of this particular article, we cannot consider that as an official report. So as far as this particular article is concerned, there is no need for you to get into detailed aspects as to on what basis the authors have arrived at this particular figure of 25.9%. On what basis the authors are saying that the overall BPL population in India has actually increased. All of these are based upon the inferences of the authors, which are not important from the perspective of the UPSC examination. So what actually becomes important for the perspective of UPSC exam? First and foremost, the basics of the poverty line estimation, the problems with the poverty line estimates in India, how to address these problems, in particular based upon the recommendations of the Rangarajan committee, the trends in the poverty line estimates, the reasons for poverty in India, and the recent debate as to whether India should focus on reducing the poverty or should it focus on reducing the income inequality. As far as the reasons for poverty is concerned, I have included the reasons in the PDF. I hope you will be able to understand on your own. And as far as the recent debate is concerned, that is whether India should focus upon increasing its GDP growth or should it focus on reducing the income inequality. I have already covered this as part of my economic survey discussion. The link to this particular video has been given in the description box below. Further, based upon our discussion, you should be in a position to write an answer to this particular mains question for practice. The question here is, do you think the poverty line estimation in India is able to capture the real poverty scenario? Give arguments in support of your answer. Apart from this particular mains question for practice, you should also be in a position to attempt these 3 prelims question for practice. So let us first start with the basics related to the poverty line estimates. Now coming to the first term of absolute poverty, a person is said to be absolutely poor if he is unable to meet his basic requirements. His basic requirements here could be food, clothing, shelter, education, healthcare and so on. See, as to what constitutes the basic requirements, this changes across the time and across the countries. Because of this, the concept of absolute poverty also keeps changing across the time as well as across the countries. Now take for instance, in case of India, during 1970s, having a telephone connection, this was considered as a luxury. Having a TV connection, this was considered as a luxury then. But now, in the year 2020, having a mobile phone connection or having a TV connection, this is considered as a basic necessity. So what was considered as a luxury then, now it has become a necessity. This is as per the time. Similarly, if you look at across the countries, now in countries such as say Finland, having a broadband access, it is considered to be a legal right. But in case of India, having a broadband connection, it is considered as a luxury. So the question as to what constitutes my basic requirement, this will vary across the time and across the countries. The next concept is that of the relative poverty. A person is said to be relatively poor if his overall income or his overall expenditure is lower than the national level income or the national level expenditure. So such a person may be able to meet his basic requirements, but his income or the expenditure is below the national level average. So such kind of people can be considered to be as relatively poor. The next concept is that of the poverty line. See, poverty line here basically means as to how much of money should a person or a household spend in order to meet their basic requirements. And the next concept is the poverty line basket, which basically denotes as to what constitutes the basic requirements of the people. Now let me explain this by an example. Now let's say there is a poverty line basket in India, which basically includes certain goods and services which constitutes the basic requirements of the people. This includes say food, clothing, shelter, education, healthcare and so on. Now how much money should people spend in order to meet this basic requirement? That we will call it as a poverty line. Now what all goods and services are covered here, that will constitute the poverty line basket. Now for example, let's say in the state of Karnataka, a particular person may be required to spend say rupees 1000 per month in order to meet his basic requirements. So this rupees 1000 will be considered as poverty line in Karnataka. But as we know, the prices of goods and services vary across the states. So for example, in state of Tamil Nadu, the prices of same goods and services say maybe around 1100. So in case of Tamil Nadu, the poverty line would be 1100. So here, what constitutes the basic requirement is remaining same. But the value of the poverty line is different depending upon the prices of these goods and services across India. The next one is the head count ratio, which basically tells us as to what percent or what proportion of people is living below the poverty line in India. With respect to poverty line estimation in India, the nodal agency to determine the percentage of BPL population in India is the Niti Aayog. Earlier it was the Planning Commission. This estimation is based upon the monthly per capita consumption expenditure survey of the households. This survey was carried out every 5 years by the National Sample Survey Office. But as you know, this office has now been turned into the National Statistical Office. So right now this survey is carried out by the National Statistical Office, and ideally it is to be carried out at a frequency of every 5 years. So based upon the results of this particular survey, the Niti Aayog then estimates the percentage of BPL population in India. So let us understand as to what is the methodology which is adopted by Niti Aayog in order to estimate the percentage of BPL population. See, first and foremost, the National Statistical Office would be required to choose a sample. Now this sample should be chosen in such a way that it represents the entire population of India, or it represents almost all the categories of households in India. Now let's say here we have chosen a sample size of say around 100 households which are scattered across India, and these 100 households are carefully chosen in order to ensure that they represent almost all the categories of households. So once these households are carefully chosen, questions are asked to each of these households as to how much money they are spending on these goods and services which become part of my poverty line basket. Now for example, let's say my poverty line basket here includes only the food. So here questions are asked to each of the households as to how much money they are spending on the food on a monthly basis. Now let's say that this particular question has been posed to a particular household located in the state of Karnataka, where the poverty line is rupees 1000. Now this poverty line is per person per month. That means one person should spend at least 1000 rupees per month in order to meet his basic requirements. Now let's say this particular household has totally 5 family members. So how much money should this particular household spend so that it is able to meet his basic requirement? So if it has 5 family members, then this household would have to spend more than rupees 5000 in order to meet its basic needs. So if the household is spending less than rupees 5000, then such an household will be categorized as below poverty line. Or if this household is spending more than 5000 rupees, then it will be considered as above poverty line. Now let's say questions are asked to each of these 100 households, and based upon that we have arrived at certain results. 25 households are below poverty line and remaining 75 households are above poverty line. Now this is the result that we get from the sample size. Now same results are then extrapolated at a national level. Now if you try to extrapolate this at the national level, then we can come to a conclusion that almost say 25% of India's population is living below poverty line and remaining 75% is living above poverty line. This is the most simplest way of understanding as to how percentage of BPL population is actually calculated. In reality, a lot of statistical exercises, a lot of statistical formulae are being adopted in order to come out with the estimation of poverty line. All of these are actually not important from the perspective of the UPSC examination. Further, a very important aspect here is most of the students confuse between the poverty line estimation and the identification of the poor people. Most of us believe that both of these two things are same, but in reality these two things are completely different. See, when we say poverty line estimation, here we are basically estimating as to what percentage of India's population is living below the poverty line. Now, for example, let's say we are saying that 22% of India's population is living below poverty line. This is an estimation, but here we are not identifying as to who are these 22% of India's population. That is altogether different process, and that is part of the identification. The second aspect is with respect to identification of the poor people. See, the poor people in case of India, they can be categorized into below poverty line and above poverty line. So as discussed, approximately around 22% of India's population, they are living below poverty line. Apart from that, there could be certain people who may be living above the poverty line, yet these people may be poor. So when government provides for various benefits, the benefits as such are not just limited to the below poverty line. The benefits are also applicable to certain section of above poverty line as well. Now take for instance Pradhan Mantri Ujjwala Yojana, which seeks to provide for subsidized LPG cylinder. Now the benefits of this particular scheme is not only available to the BPL population, but it is also applicable to certain section of APL population as well. So the beneficiaries of this particular program are in turn chosen through the socio-economic caste census. The same can be said about the Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana, Ayushman Bharat scheme, National Rural Livelihood Mission, and so on. So under each of these schemes and programs, the beneficiaries as such are not just limited only to the BPL population, but it also includes certain categories of APL as well. And that is based upon the socio-economic caste census. So what you must understand here is when government is saying that 22% of India's population is living below poverty line, it does not mean that only these 22% of India's population will get the benefits of government schemes and programs. The benefits of government schemes and programs will also be made available to certain categories of above poverty line, which would be identified through the socio-economic caste census. Now coming to the evolution in the poverty line estimation. For the first time ever, the poverty line estimation in case of India was done by Mr. Dadabhai Naoroji in his very famous book known as Poverty and Un-British Rule in India. According to him, the poverty line was estimated to be at rupees 16 to rupees 35 per capita per year based upon the 1867-68 prices. Next, it was the National Planning Committee under Indian National Congress, which was headed by Mr. Jawaharlal Nehru, which tried to estimate the poverty line estimates. The first official poverty line estimation in case of India was actually carried out by the working group of the Planning Commission. According to this particular working group, the poverty line basket should include only the food, and it did not take into account the non-food components. In particular, it did not take into account the non-food components such as education, health, and so on. Now, this was based upon an assumption that the poor people need not undertake expenditure on education and health, since the government is providing for these two expenses. So since the people are not spending on education and health, these expenses should not be taken into account as part of the poverty line basket. So it basically considered the food component in order to calculate the poverty line. And according to this particular working group, the poverty line was estimated to be at rupees 100 in the rural areas and rupees 125 in the urban areas. So this was based upon per month per family basis. So until 1970s, the poverty line estimation in case of India was based upon the recommendations of this particular working group. Later, in 1970s, the government appointed YK Alag Committee in order to revise the poverty line estimation. Now, this YK Alag Committee then linked the poverty line to the calorific norms. These calorific norms were 2,400 kilocalories in rural area and 2,100 kilocalories in urban areas. Now, what this means is, if a particular person in a rural area, if he is able to meet his minimum calorific norms of rupees 2,400 kilocalories, then such a person can be considered as above poverty line. The same can be said about a person living in an urban area. So if a particular person is unable to meet his minimum calorific norms, then such a person can be considered as living below the poverty line. So here basically we used to calculate as to what is the amount of expenditure that is needed in order to meet the calorific norms as stipulated by YK Alag, and that expenditure was considered as a poverty line. So the recommendations of the YK Alag committee was then used to calculate the poverty line estimates until 1990s. So in 1990s, the government then appointed another committee which was headed by Mr. Lakdawala. Now earlier, when poverty line was calculated according to the YK Alag committee recommendations, we used to have only all India poverty lines. We did not have state specific poverty lines. And as I said before, there is a need to have state specific poverty lines because the prices of goods and services vary across the states. Hence, in order to address this particular problem, the Lakdawala committee then introduced the state specific poverty lines. So this was a major improvement which was introduced by Lakdawala committee in 1990s. So the recommendations of the Lakdawala committee were then used to estimate the poverty line in case of India until 2000. But in the year 2005, the government appointed another committee headed by Mr. Suresh Tendulkar. Now the reason as to why this particular committee was appointed was because the poverty line basket which we were using in the 1990s, that poverty line basket had remained same since 1970s. In particular, we used to take into account only the food related expenditure. We did not take into account the expenditure related to education, health, etc. as part of the poverty line basket. One of the most important recommendations of this particular committee was to move away from the calorific norms and include even the education and health as part of the poverty line basket. Which means now when we say poverty line, this poverty line would mean as to how much money the people should spend in order to meet their basic requirements such as food, education, healthcare, and certain other important non-food related expenses as well. Whereas earlier, as per the Lakdawala committee or YK Alag committee, we used to predominantly focus upon only the food related expenditure. We did not take into account the expenditure related to education, health, and other important non-food related expenditure. So this was a very important recommendation given by Suresh Tendulkar. So right now we are using the Suresh Tendulkar committee's recommendations for the estimation of poverty line in India. So as you can see, in the year 2011-12, the poverty line in the rural areas at all India level, this was rupees 816, whereas in urban areas it was rupees 1000. Now this particular table here shows the poverty line estimates by different committees such as the Lakdawala committee, Tendulkar committee, and the Rangarajan committee, about which I will be discussing in the next slide. Focus upon the estimates of the Suresh Tendulkar committees. As per this committee, the percentage of BPL population in 1990s, it was 45.3, but then it got reduced to 22% by the year 2011-12. In particular, the percentage of BPL population reduced by almost 15% within 7 years, that is from the year 2004-5 to 2011-12. So because of this, the government considered this as a huge achievement. The government was then proclaiming that it was able to reduce the BPL population by almost around 15%. But on the other hand, the opposition parties, media, some of the economists started criticizing this particular estimate by Suresh Tendulkar. According to the opposition party, media, economists, etc., they started criticizing that the poverty line in case of India, it is too low. And since the poverty line is too low, on its own, the percentage of BPL population in a country such as India would reduce even without the government taking substantial amount of policy actions. So this in turn created a lot of controversy. Hence, in order to put this particular controversy to rest, the government of the day then appointed a committee under the leadership of Mr. Rangarajan. So let's understand as to how the Rangarajan committee's recommendations are different from the Suresh Tendulkar committee's recommendations. See, one of the most important deviation of the Rangarajan committee is with respect to poverty line basket. According to Suresh Tendulkar, the poverty line basket included both food as well as non-food. In particular, it included education, health and so on. Now the Rangarajan committee expanded the poverty line basket to include the calorific norms, protein and fat requirements, as well as the non-food expenses such as clothing, house rent, transportation, education, health and so on. In particular, as you can see, the calorific norms were laid down for both rural and urban areas. And these calorific norms were substantially lower than the previous calorific norms laid down by YK Alag committee. Now this reduction in the calorific norms was based upon the recommendations of the Indian Council of Medical Research. So basically the Rangarajan committee included all of these components into the poverty line basket. Now based upon this particular poverty line basket, the Rangarajan committee then calculated the poverty line for the year 2011-12. This came out to be rupees 972 in the rural areas and rupees 1407 in the urban areas. And as you can see, the poverty line which was calculated by Rangarajan committee, this was relatively higher as compared to the poverty line calculated according to the Suresh Tendulkar committee. So since the poverty line was relatively higher as per the Rangarajan committee, accordingly the percentage of BPL population was also relatively higher. This increased to 29.5% at all India level from 22% according to Suresh Tendulkar committee. But the government as of now has not accepted the recommendations of the Rangarajan committee. The government is still following the Suresh Tendulkar committee's recommendations for the estimation of poverty line in India. Now coming to the last section about the current problems with the poverty line estimation, what are the counter arguments given by the government, and what should be the way forward with respect to poverty line estimates. See, with respect to first problem, as highlighted before, some of the economists believe that the poverty line in case of India, it is too low, because of which they believe that India may be underestimating its poverty. In response, the government has said that the percentage of BPL population as measured according to Suresh Tendulkar committee, this is comparable to the poverty line estimates according to World Bank. So India is not underestimating its poverty simply because our poverty line estimates is in line with the international organizations such as the World Bank. Secondly, see, when we say poverty, poverty cannot be considered as a food deprivation alone. Poverty can arise on account of multiple deprivations such as housing, sanitation, education, health, etc. That is why one of the best ways to measure poverty in a particular country is by looking at the multi-dimensional poverty index. In case of India, in the year 2020, according to this particular index, the percentage of the poor people was at 28%. And as you can see, this is much higher than 22% according to our official estimates. Apart from this, some of the economists have also highlighted that the poverty line estimation in case of India, it is based upon a flawed assumption. The flawed assumption here is we do believe that if a particular household is able to meet its food requirements, automatically such a household would also be able to meet its non-food requirements. Now, based upon such a flawed assumption, we do not take into account the people's expenditure on certain critical non-food requirements. Now, take for instance, according to Suresh Tendulkar committee, we are not taking the expenses of the people on clothing, rent, transportation, and so on. So some economists believe that it is based upon a flawed assumption that if people are able to meet their calorific norms, automatically people would be able to meet their non-food requirements as well. But we know that this is a flawed assumption because the first priority for the people is to meet their food requirements. Only after meeting their food requirements, if they have certain money which is saved, that they will use it for non-food requirements. So the economists have highlighted that the poverty line estimation is based upon a flawed assumption. Now, against these two arguments, the government has a counter argument. The government says that when we are measuring poverty line, our intention is not to identify the poor people. Our intention is not to identify the beneficiaries for government schemes and programs such as the Ayushman Bharat, Swachh Bharat Mission, Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana, and so on. Our intention of measuring the poverty line is only for statistical purpose. Our intention of measuring the poverty line is to ascertain as to whether the government policies, whether the government schemes have been able to reduce the percentage of BPL population. So we are using the poverty line only for statistical purpose, and we are not using the poverty line for the identification of beneficiaries. Now, for example, here the percentage of BPL population has got reduced from 37% to 22%. Now, this is purely for statistical purpose. Here we are getting to know that the government schemes, the government policies are working, because of which we have been able to reduce the percentage of people living below the poverty line. But it is in no way means that only 22% of India's population will be considered as beneficiaries under the government schemes and programs. As I discussed before, the beneficiaries of government schemes and programs would be identified separately through the socio-economic caste census. So even if the percentage of BPL population in a country is reducing, it is in no way going to affect the beneficiaries of government schemes and programs. The next problem, as highlighted by economists, is that the poverty line basket as such, it should be updated on a regular basis to consider new goods, new services which are now become a necessity. Take for instance, mobile, bank account, all of these which are considered as luxury then, they are now become a basic necessity. Accordingly, these things should be considered as part of my poverty line basket. In response, the government counter argues that if we keep on frequently updating the poverty line basket, then we will not be able to track our progress on the poverty line elevation. Now, for example, let's say we are measuring the poverty line in the year 2004-5 by taking into account a poverty line basket. Now, let's say the poverty line basket here includes A, B, and C. So, when we are measuring the poverty line in the year 2011-12, the poverty line basket should remain the same. That is, it should include A, B, and C. Only then we can compare the values at an all India level. If we add more goods and services in the poverty line basket, such as say mobile phone, bank account, etc., in that particular case, whatever results that we get here, they will not be comparable with the earlier results. And if you are not being able to compare, we will not be able to track our progress on the poverty elevation. So that is why the government says that we should not undertake frequent updation of the poverty line basket. So as you can see, with respect to each of the problems, the government has its own counter argument. So let's try to understand as to what should be the way forward according to the Arvind Panagriya task force which was appointed by the Niti Aayog. According to this particular task force, whenever the government fixes the poverty line, it is bound to create debate. It is bound to create controversy. But at the same time, we must persist with the measurement of poverty line because measuring of poverty line will help us track our progress in the elevation of poverty. If you are measuring the poverty line estimates on a regular basis, we will come to know as to whether the government schemes, program, initiatives, etc. are able to make an impact on the lives of the people. That is why fixing of poverty line is extremely important. So in this regard, this particular task force has given four options before the government. Option number 1, continue with the Tendulkar poverty line. Option number 2, accept the Rangarajan poverty line. Option number 3, track the progress of the bottom 30% of India's population. Or the option number 4, track the progress of the people in certain specific components of poverty. Now, for example, this year's economic survey has unveiled the bare necessities index, under which it is tracking as to people's access to bare necessities such as sanitation, etc. Has it improved or not? So the points which have been mentioned on this particular slide here can be used by you in order to write an answer to this particular mains question for practice. As far as these four prelims question for practice is concerned, I hope you would be able to answer these questions on your own. In case if you want to know the detailed explanation to these questions, you can attempt the quiz on the eLearn platform. With this, let us now take up the next article. The next article appears on page number 8. The article is titled as No Bifurcation Plan for Tamil Nadu or Other States Government. Recently, while replying to a question in Lok Sabha, the Union Home Minister has stated that as of now, the central government has no plans to bifurcate either the state of Tamil Nadu or any other state in India. This article shall be important from the perspective of Indian polity. See, from the perspective of prelims, one should be aware about the provisions for the creation of new states. And as far as the mains examination is concerned, one should be aware about pros and cons of the smaller states in India. Because of the time constraint, we will not go into the mains rated aspect of this particular topic. We'll confine ourselves to the prelims rated aspect about the constitutional provisions for the creation of new state, based upon which we will try to solve this particular prelims question for the practice. See, as of now, in case of India, across the different states, there have been demands to create separate states. Take for instance, in state of Karnataka, we have the demand coming from Tamil Nadu, Kodagu. In Maharashtra, it is the Vidarbha region. In Gujarat, it is the Saurashtra region. In West Bengal, it is the Gorkha land. In Assam, it is the Bodo land. So as of now, the central government has clearly hinted that it has no plans to bifurcate any state or to create any new states in India. Against this particular backdrop, let us have a look at the constitutional provisions which are used in order to create a new state. See, Article 3 of the Indian Constitution provides that the Parliament by law can form a new state. A new state can be formed by separating a territory from any of the existing state or by uniting two or more existing states. So, the Parliament can either increase or decrease the area of any state. And such a power has been vested in pursuance with Article 3 of the Indian Constitution. Now, in order to create a new state, obviously the Parliament has to introduce a new bill. Now, there are two conditions for the introduction of this bill. The first condition is this bill can be introduced only with the prior recommendation of the President. And the second condition is before recommending the bill, the President has to refer the bill to the concerned state legislature and take the opinion of the state legislature within a defined time limit. However, at the same time, neither the President nor the Indian Parliament is bound by the advice given by the concerned state legislature. So it is up to the President or the Indian Parliament to either accept or reject the views expressed by the concerned state legislature. So from this particular discussion, we can come to a conclusion that the Parliament of India can redraw the political map of India according to its own will. The territorial integrity of a state or the continued existence of a particular state is not guaranteed by the Indian Constitution. This is very important. That is why we keep saying that India is an indestructible union of the destructible states. So as a union, it is indestructible. But when it comes to the territorial integrity of the state, when it comes to the continued existence of the state, the political boundaries of a state can be redrawn according to the will of the Parliament. Based upon this particular discussion, let us try to solve this particular prelims question for the practice. The first question here is, a bill for the purpose of creation of new state requires special majority in the Parliament to become a law. Please do note that a bill for the purpose of creation of new state requires only a simple majority and not a special majority of the Parliament. More importantly, such a bill is not even considered as an amendment to the Indian Constitution. So it is not considered as amendment under Article 368 of the Indian Constitution. The second statement is the power of the Parliament to diminish the areas of a state under Article 3 also includes the power to cede the Indian territory to a foreign country. Please try to find out as to whether this particular statement is correct or not. Based upon that, try to find out the correct answer to this particular question. With this, let us now take up the next article. The next article appears on page number 7. The article is titled as Providing the Horizontal Quota the Bihar Way. This article shall be important from the perspective of GS Paper 2, Polity and Governance. The Bihar government has recently announced 33% horizontal reservation for women in the state engineering and medical colleges. This will in turn encourage the girls to pursue higher studies in the state and will also increase the labor force participation rate for the women in the state of Bihar. Now, this particular article is actually specific to the state of Bihar. But from the perspective of the UPSC examination, there are two things which you should know. One is the difference between the vertical and horizontal reservation, and the second one is the trends in female labor force participation rate in India. So let us understand these two concepts. As you know, the government of India as well as the state governments provide for the reservation in jobs as well as educational institutions. Now, with respect to reservation, the reservations can be categorized into two types, that is the vertical reservation and the horizontal reservation. Now, the concept of the vertical and horizontal reservation was explained by the Supreme Court in the famous Indira Sani judgment. Now, according to Supreme Court, when the government of India or the state governments, when they provide for reservations in the favor of backward classes such as say scheduled caste, scheduled tribes, OBCs and the newly introduced economically weaker section, such kind of reservation can be considered to be kind of vertical reservation. The state governments can also provide for reservation in the favor of women, ex-servicemen, transgenders, differently abled people and so on. So when reservations are provided for these sections, then such kind of reservation policy is referred to as the horizontal reservation. Now, this particular article here highlights that the government of Bihar has decided to provide for 33% reservation in the favor of women in engineering as well as medical colleges in the state of Bihar. So let's understand as to how would this work. Now, as you all know, the government has already provided for reservation to each of these sections. For example, we have provided for 15% reservation for SCs, 7.5 reservation to STs, 27% reservation to OBCs and 10% reservation to the economically weaker section. Now this we call it as a kind of vertical reservation wherein the reservation has been categorized into different categories. Now when we provide for 33% reservation for women, it would mean that the women would be able to avail reservation in each of these vertical categories. So the horizontal reservation would cut across each of these vertical categories of reservation. Now for example, let's say there are 200 seats in an engineering college which are required to be filled up. Out of these 200 seats, 33% seats, that is 66 seats, should be reserved in the favor of women. And these 66 seats can come from each of these categories. So 33% from SCs, 33% from STs, 33% from OBCs, 33% from economically weaker section, as well as it has to come even in the unreserved category as well. So even in the unreserved category also, the women will be able to avail the reservation. So this particular decision by the Bihar government to provide for horizontal reservation for women in the educational institution, it is in turn said to bring a number of benefits. First and foremost, it is said to reduce the dropout rate of the girls, especially from the secondary education. Secondly, it will encourage the girls to pursue the higher education. And thirdly, as more number of girls pursue higher education, we would be able to see higher participation of women in the workforce. So the overall female labor force participation rate in the state of Bihar could increase because of such a reservation policy. Now, based upon these benefits, the author of this particular article recommends that even the other state governments as well as the union government should follow the Bihar government lead and must introduce a horizontal quota for women in the higher educational institution as well as the state employment. Now, taking this forward, let us have a look at the female labor force participation rate in case of India and how it has changed over a period of time. See, when we say the female labor force participation rate in the age group 15 to 59, it is basically calculated as the number of females in the labor force divided by the number of females in the age group of 15 to 59. So in the numerator here, when we say labor force, it will basically include two categories of women. One, those women who are employed, and two, those women who are looking out for work. So as you can see here, the overall female labor force participation rate has reduced from 45.2% in the year 1993-94 to 25% in the year 2017-18. In contrast, if you take into account the male labor force participation rate, it is much higher at 75%. And overall labor force participation rate in case of India for the age group of 15 to 59, this was 50% in the year 2017-18. So you can see a large gap between male and female labor force participation rate. So the lower female labor force participation rate can be attributed to basically two reasons. One, less number of women are employed, and two, less number of women are looking out for work. Now, according to the World Economic Forum, if the female labor force participation rate increases to match up to the male labor force participation rate, that is, if the female labor force participation rate increases to 75%, then the overall GDP size of India can well increase by 27%. So that is why there is a need to increase the female labor force participation rate. So let us try to understand as to what factors have contributed to the decline in the female labor force participation rate. These factors can broadly be categorized into two types, that is supply side factors and the demand side factors. As far as the supply side factors are concerned, this basically denotes that less number of females are entering into the labor force because of certain supply side constraints. These could include higher enrollment of females in the higher educational institutions, because of which they are not entering the labor force. So probably they will enter the labor force after a certain duration of time once they complete their higher education. Next, more number of women are now opting for the household duties, typically due to increase in the household income levels. So typically if you look at the rural areas, in rural areas the women work in order to supplement their household incomes. And if the household incomes keep on increasing, the females as such would withdraw from the labor force. So according to some of the studies, there has been increase in the household incomes in comparison to 1993, because of which less number of females are now entering the labor force. The third factor is a cultural factor, basically the patriarchal norms, social constraints, which in turn prevent the women from entering the labor force. As far as the demand side is concerned, here the demand side factors would mean that we are making it less conducive for the women to enter into labor force. For example, the Indian economy has undertaken a structural transformation. There has been an overall decline in the share of workforce employed in the Indian agriculture. Earlier, it used to be almost like 58%, and now it has dropped down to 45%. So now we have less employment opportunities in the agriculture. And as far as women are concerned, more number of women in the rural areas, they were employed in the agriculture. But because of the decline in the workforce employed in the agriculture, now these women should have ideally found jobs in the other sectors. Let's say the manufacturing sector, service sector, and so on. But we have failed to create jobs for the women in the manufacturing sector as well as the services sector, which in turn has led to decline in the female labor force participation rate. Nextly, there has been an overall decline in the labor intensive industries in the urban areas. So typically, if you look at the textile industry, leather industry, now these are the labor intensive industries, and these industries employ more number of women. But in the recent years, because of the decline in the output of these industries, less employment opportunities have been created. And lastly, there is a significant wage gap between males and females, which in turn has reduced the incentives for the females to enter into the labor force. So these are the factors which have contributed to the decline in the female labor force participation rate. Please do let us know in the comment section as to what strategies would have to be adopted in order to increase the female labor force participation rate in India. With this, let us now take up the next article. The next article appears on page number 9. The article is titled as Governor's Pardon Power Overrides Section 433A of the Code of Criminal Procedure. This article shall be important from the perspective of Indian polity. Before discussing this particular article, let us first understand the background. See, in our DNS dated 22nd of Jan 2021, I had discussed about the clemency powers of the executive. So as you know, both the president as well as the governor have been vested with the clemency powers. President has been vested with the clemency powers as per Article 72 of the Indian Constitution, whereas governor has been vested with the same powers under Article 161. The clemency powers of the executive include pardon, which removes both the sentence as well as conviction, commutation, which is to substitute harsher punishment by lighter punishment, remission, that is reducing the amount of sentence without changing the character of sentence, respite, that is awarding lesser punishment due to the special facts or circumstances, or reprieve, which is basically a temporary stay on the execution of a sentence. Such clemency powers have been vested with the executive in order to correct the judicial error and afford relief to the people from the sentence. If you look at the differences between the clemency powers of the president and the governor, the president has been empowered to pardon a death sentence which has been issued against the central law. The governor, he cannot pardon a death sentence even if such a death sentence has been issued against a state law. But the governor can commute a death sentence. So with respect to commutation of death sentence, both the president as well as governor has equal powers. The president can both pardon as well as commute a death sentence which is against the central law, whereas a governor cannot pardon a death sentence, but he can only commute a death sentence which has been awarded in accordance with the state law. More importantly, the president alone has the clemency powers with respect to the punishment which has been given by military courts. And as you can see, over a period of time, the Supreme Court of India has given a number of clarifications as well as judgments with respect to how these clemency powers have to be exercised. Now, taking this forward, the Supreme Court has given further clarifications with respect to exercise of these clemency powers. In particular, the Supreme Court has clarified the interrelationship between the clemency powers of the executive as provided by the Indian Constitution and the Code of Criminal Procedure. In particular, if you look at section 433A of the Code of Criminal Procedure, it basically says that if a particular person has been given a lifetime imprisonment, such a person has to serve in a prison for a minimum of 14 years. Before completing his stay of 14 years in jail, such a person cannot be released based upon the exercise of clemency powers by the governor. Similarly, let's say there is a person who has been awarded a death sentence. Later on, his death sentence has been commuted to lifetime imprisonment. Once again, this particular person is required to serve a minimum of 14 years in jail. Before completing his 14 years in jail, such a person cannot be released based upon the clemency powers of the executive. So basically, section 433A provided that the governor can exercise the clemency powers only after the prisoner completes the 14 years in jail. Now the Supreme Court of India has clarified that the constitutional powers vested with the executive, that is with the governor, this in turn overrides the section 43A of CRPC. For example, if a particular person is serving a lifetime imprisonment, in that particular case, the governor can exercise his clemency powers and provide for the release of such a person even before he completes 14 years in jail. So this is what you have to know with respect to this particular article. As far as prelims MCQ number 6 is concerned, it is quite simple. Try to find out the answers on your own and let us know the answer in the comments section. Next, we have two important articles which have already been covered in our previous DNS videos. The first article appears on page number 6. This article talks about the greater focus of US in the Indo-Pacific region. This article has already been covered in our DNS dated 12th of July 2021. The next article appears on the business page. Now, this particular article highlights that according to a recent report published by the Parliamentary Panel on Finance, the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code is facing a number of issues such as low case closure rate, lower recovery rates, vacancies in the national company law tribunals, delay in the admission of applications, and so on. All of these aspects I have already discussed in the DNS dated 2nd of July 2021. So with respect to these two articles, I have provided you with the link in the description box below. So those of you who have not gone through these particular articles, please click on the link and go to these important articles from today's newspaper. With this, we have come to the end of today's discussion. Now let us have a look at the question for the day. The question for the day here is, which among the following best describes the concept of the Engel curve? Please try to find out as to what this curve is all about and let us know the answer in the comments section.